Okay, good.
So welcome to the audiences of Ambedkar Caravan Media. As we are now going to have a conversation with Dhammachari Lokamitra. He is the founder of a very prestigious Nagarjuna Training Institute, also known as Nagaloka campus, based in Nagpur, which is a center of Buddhist training, Buddhist social action, and also a pilgrimage center, having very beautiful walking Buddha on the campus. And it has also connections with international Buddhist in the East and the West. About Dhammachari Lokamitra, he has spent more than 40 years in India, and he has been living in India since then, and has dedicated his life to the revival of Buddhist movement that B.R.Ambedkar has launched in 1956. And Lokamitra has been engaging with a lot of issues which pertains to the Ambedkarite society and the Ambedkarite community. He is a well-known person in the Buddhist East for his active role in spreading the word about the revival of Buddhist movement in India. Also, he is a recipient of a very prestigious award called Manhe Peace Award, which was conferred upon him in South Korea, and a couple of others, including Dhammasenapati Award from Sri Lanka. And he lives in Pune, and he manages a couple of very interesting projects. Nagaloka, to its credit, has so far trained more than 1,300 youths from all over India, about 25 states in India, and they have been doing rigorous and very credible Buddhist work in their respective areas. So without taking much time, I would like to request Dhammachari Lokamitra to talk about the evolution and development of Nagaloka in this first talk of the series. Over to Lokamitra, sir.
So thank you very much, and Jai Bhim. Thank you to Ambedkar Caravan for inviting me to speak, give these 3 presentations about Nagaloka. This first one, I'm going to contextualize it in the revival of Buddhism movement initiated by Baba Saheb especially in 1956, but I'm going to be showing the background to that conversion. So Buddhism was born here at Buddha Gaya, and after absorbing the experience of the Enlightenment for 7 weeks, the Buddha walked to Sarnath below to share his understanding with his old disciples. At the end of that rainy season at Sarnath, he had 60 enlightened disciples, we're told. And his message to them was Bahujana Hitaya Bahujana Sukhaya, for the welfare and happiness of the many people. So this is very important. From the very beginning of the Sasana, active compassion was the foundation of the Dhamma. Baba Saheb says that the Buddha brought about a revolution. He was the first major voice for equality in the world. Not only Baba Saheb has said this, but many other teachers have said this. The Buddha was the greatest critic of caste. He challenged the roots of Brahmanism. There was no Hinduism as we know it then. He questioned the belief in Brahma. He undermined the practice of caste. He challenged Brahminical superiority, animal sacrifice, belief in Atman, and degradation of women. So Baba Saheb said Buddhism was a revolution. Though it began as a revolution, a religious revolution, it became a social and political revolution. It had many, many different manifestations. Over the centuries, Buddhism developed a great culture in India, great art and beauty, concern for the disadvantaged, peace. Baba Sahib spoke on the Mauryan period. He said, which reached its heights under Ashoka. There is only one period in Indian history which is a period of freedom, greatness, and glory. That is the period of the Maurya Empire. At all other times, the country suffered from defeat and darkness. But the Maurya Empire was a period when the Chatuvarnya was completely annihilated. And we all know this, the symbol of King Ashoka. He ruled according to the principles of the Dhamma. So he's called a Dhammaraja. And he spread Buddhism not only throughout India, but he sent bhikkhus abroad, Sri Lanka, to the east, even as far, we're told, as Greece in the west. But about 700 years ago, Buddhism died out in India as an organized religion. Today, there are ruins everywhere in India, but only ruins to this great civilization. These at the top are the ruins of the great Nalanda University, probably the greatest university in Indian history, where many thousands from all over Asia studied. We're told that its library was so vast that when it was destroyed, it took 6 months to burn. And below, these Buddhas in Tamil Nadu had just been discovered when some of us visited there a few years ago. Dr. Ambedkar said that one only has to dig down a foot anywhere in India to discover the great Indian Buddhist past. So according to Dr. Ambedkar, one of the major factors in the disappearance of Buddhism was the counter-revolution. The Brahmins never forgave the Buddhist denial of the social pyramid, which had them at the top. And they tried to undermine Buddhism in many ways. First of all, they took over Buddhist practices. They became vegetarian. Before the Buddha, at the time of the Buddha, they were great meat eaters. They sacrificed horses, they sacrificed cows. But because of that, they lost a lot of support to Buddhists who sort of spoke against this. Then they copied the Bhaktin devotion of Buddhism. Even the term Bhagwan has its origins in Buddhism. The Puranic gods were all developed post-Buddha to counteract the influence of Buddha, to sort of, as it were, divert the energy that went into the worship of the Buddha. Logic, we understand, was developed by Buddhism when it was taken over by Brahmins, by Hindus. Monasticism was not really known in India before the Buddha. The first Indian temples were Buddhist. Again, Hindus took over, they started temples as a result of that, and they also took over some existing Buddhist temples. There are quite a few temples in India where that's known to be the case. Secondly, that the Buddha was made into a god. He was made into an avatar of Vishnu. You see here at the bottom right, yeah, the 10 avatars of Vishnu. There he is, the 9th. He was considered to be great, but his teaching was wrong. His teaching was to distract the enemies of the gods so that they wouldn't defeat the gods. And even great Hindu teachers like Vivekananda had this idea. They thought the Buddha was great, but his teaching was not to be followed. As a result of this, the Buddha and Buddhism were lost to Indian history, very skillfully buried. They only became known again in the 19th century. Even King Ashoka, who I think H.G. Wells, the great historian, said was the greatest king the world has known, was very skillfully forgotten. Then fourthly, they committed horrible violence on Buddhists. I mean, it's really disturbing to read what happened. And this was initiated by Pushyamitra Sangha, but not just him, it went on for centuries. And as a result, Buddhists became broken men. They were settled on the edge of the village in the worst places. And we all know what Dr. B.R.Ambedkar's sort of understanding of that was. And then the caste system, which was quite fluid at the time of the Buddha, was developed further and also hardened. So that the divisions between castes became much harder. It was much, and the Manusmriti, we know, formalized untouchability and also the degradation of women. Although Buddhism died out in India, fortunately it spread throughout Asia. So it was preserved in many other countries in Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Tibet, Mongolia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, China, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, and other places. And one thing that is notable, that everywhere it went, the Dhamma contributed to a positive society. It contributed to peace, to education, to art, to generosity, and to compassion. Of course, there were exceptions. Today, these Buddhist ruins on the left at Baja, near Pune, are being worshipped once again. This picture was not set up. My friend was there visiting, and he saw this. It was a spontaneous bowing to the stupa by this fellow Baba Seb. Yeah? And here below, of course, is the Diksha Bhumi in Nagpur, celebrating the revival of Buddhism in India, the conversion to Buddhism, which was led by Baba Seb on the 14th of October 1956, when he took 500,000 people with him. It was the biggest and momentous conversion ceremony in the history of the world, as far as I know. And this took place on the 2500th anniversary of the Buddha's enlightenment, and also on the anniversary of King Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism. That's why it's called Ashoka Vijayadashmi. And this is very significant because clearly he wanted the sort of social implications of Buddhism that he saw in King Ashoka's time. So this conversion changed the religious and the social landscape in India more than anything else since the Buddha and Ashoka. And it's only now, 64 years since the conversion, and we've seen enormous changes just taking place in that short time. Here on the right is Venerable Chandramani, from whom Baba Seb took the refuges and precepts before he himself gave them to his followers. Baba Seb's great life was dedicated to the eradication of untouchability and the establishment of a society permeated by the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And in the course of that remarkable life, he brought about many changes in education, in economics, in labor, in politics, in law, and many other areas of social life. And as we all know, he was the first law minister of independent India and overall responsible for drafting the new Indian constitution. And he resigned when Parliament would not agree to give women equal rights in inheritance and divorce. He was very, very much a man of principle. But for long, he'd realized that legal changes were not enough to bring about the deep social changes he saw were needed in order to eradicate untouchability and bring about a society of true democracy. He'd started his career trying to reform Hinduism. We all know of this picture here, taking water from the Mahad tank, and we all know what happened after that. There were the temple entry campaigns and other attempts of his to try and reform Hinduism, the burning of the Manusmriti. Eventually, he concluded that the only way to eradicate untouchability was to leave the religion that had created it, because he did not believe that it would change within that religion. Now, he believed that people needed religion. He said the new world needs religion far more than the old world did. So the question to him was, which religion? Now, he looked at different religions. He looked at Islam, Christianity, Sikhism. He looked at communism. He examined them all with his incredible penetrating intellect. He had certain criteria that he was not prepared to compromise on. In Annihilation of Caste, he said this religion must be in accordance with liberty, equality, and fraternity. In the same book, he says his ideal society must be based on fraternity, which he said is another name for democracy. Democracy, he said, is not merely a form of government. It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence towards fellow men. In other words, real democracy was not just a matter of one man, one vote, but of ethics, of attitudes to each other. He developed this in a short booklet printed in May 1950 in the Mahabodhi Journal called The Buddha and the Future of His Religion. And to summarize, he says that actually it's not law that determines most people's behavior. What determines most people's behavior is their sense of morality, the sense they have of what is good and bad, what is right and wrong. Yeah? The law, he said, is only intended to keep the minority within the range of social discipline. So, but what underpinned the sense of morality? Well, he said that was religion. So there's a problem. Morality differs from one religion to another. In Christianity, in South Africa, some people justified apartheid on the basis of Christianity. Capitalists sometimes say, well, Christ said, the poor will always be with you. In other words, justifying inequality. Slavery was justified by some Christians in terms of Christianity. And we all know in India how untouchability has been part of caste and untouchability. To be traditionally a good caste Hindu means observing caste. So morality differs from one religion to another. And in looking at an appropriate religion, Dr. Ambedkar had three criteria. Religion, he said, should be, first of all, in accordance with science and reason. Secondly, it should recognize the fundamental social tenets of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And thirdly, it should not sanctify or ennoble poverty. The religion, he said, which satisfies all these tests is Buddhism. In other words, Buddhism is the only religion which the modern world can have. A very, very strong statement. And he connected liberty and equality and fraternity with Buddhism in other places too. In his interview in the BBC in 1954, you all know this. Positively, my social philosophy may be said in 3 words: liberty, equality, fraternity. I've derived them from the teachings of my master, the Buddha. And equally emphatic in the Buddha or Karl Marx, he said, it seems that the 3, liberty, equality, and fraternity, can coexist only if one follows the way of the Buddha. In November 1956, he looked at this a bit further, and he said, this was in a conference in Kathmandu on Buddhism and communism. He said the greatest thing the Buddha has done was to say that if we want to reform the world, we have to start by reforming our own minds, that is, our own attitudes, our own ethical, our own moral attitudes. Dr. Ambedkar was the man most responsible for drafting the Constitution. And he emphasized, as we know in that very famous speech, that political democracy, one man, one vote, was not enough. Only social democracy, one man, one value, only a change in attitude towards other people could bring a real democracy about. He said, what does social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, fraternity as the principles of life. These principles he managed to put as central in the preamble to the Constitution, which is there on the left. Now, he could not mention Buddhism in the Constitution, but we all know that for him, it was especially through Buddhism that these principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity could be realized. It was Buddhism, as he understood it, that gave them real meaning. So despite the significance of his work on the Constitution, it was his conversion to Buddhism that I believe, from what I've read of his, was the crowning glory of his great life. Not only read, but I met many people in the first years of my time in India who had known him and known him very, very well. And this conversion to Buddhism has given new hope to his own community and also to India as a whole. Slowly, slowly, some others are realizing this. He could so easily have taken another path, and this is something every day I think about. He came from one of the most oppressed situations the world has known. And today, many people who suffer oppression turn to violence and terrorism. Everywhere in the world, this is going on. He could so easily have turned to religion or an ideology whose fringe elements endorsed violence. So easily he could have done that. And if he'd done that, with a number of oppressed people in India today, especially scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, numbering probably getting on for 30% of the population, 25, 30% of the population, you're talking of 400 million people at least. If that had happened and they'd followed him into that, India would have been a bloodbath today. But he was committed to the path of the Buddha, the Prince of Peace, and India owes him an enormous debt. The world owes him an enormous debt of gratitude for his example. But a peaceful path meant a long path. 64 years after the conversion, untouchability is still practiced all over India, even today. These pictures are all taken fairly recently. Today, because of their birth, as in that community, so many people suffer appalling living conditions, limited education and employment possibilities, and discrimination, if not harassment and violence. Dr. Ambedkar died just 6 weeks after the conversion, leaving this enormous new Buddhist movement leaderless. And at that time, remember, you can speak to your grandparents and find out, parents, most of his followers were extremely poor, illiterate, cut off in villages, and vulnerable to oppression. We see so many atrocities today, but you can imagine what the situation was 65 years ago. His political heirs mainly did not understand the importance he gave to Buddhism and very quickly factionalized the new movement. And other Indians, on the whole, dismissed the conversion as a political ploy. They were, on the whole, not at all supportive. Very, very, very few people. And the new Buddhists were ignored by the Buddhist world. Baba Sahib expected help from the Buddhist world. He saw that only help could come from them. But they ignored him. Great Buddhists from the East went to America, went to Hong Kong, Singapore, Europe, but they didn't come here except very, very few. So then his new Buddhist followers had very, very little chance to learn the Dhamma and progress in the way that he'd hoped. This, by the way, is his funeral in Mumbai, the largest funeral Mumbai had known. But despite so many disadvantages, the conversions have continued. So such is the confidence people have in Baba Saheb. At the time of the conversion, there were 500,000. Now, some people say they're well over 50 million, maybe many, many more, and it's growing faster all the time. Most of the first conversions took place in Maharashtra, among the community in which Baba Saheb was born. And that community exists in every single village in Maharashtra. And almost all members of that community followed him into Buddhism. So what you've got is, in every single village and town in Maharashtra, there are now Buddhists, and they want to learn the Dhamma. And they're incredibly grateful for the life the Dhamma has given them, the freedom. They have a new identity. They no longer have to consider themselves according to how they've been defined by the caste system as less than human. They're human beings. The Dhamma has given them true humanity. And they welcome Dhamma teachers in villages and towns. I personally have traveled through many, many, many villages and towns in Maharashtra, especially in the 80s and early 90s. And everywhere we met incredible welcome, incredible interest. People want to know how the Dhamma can help them to live more truly human lives and how it can help them create a better society. So this was a situation I experienced in 1978 and for the years after that when I started Triratna activities in India. Everywhere people wanted to understand, everywhere in Maharashtra at that time, people wanted to understand and practice the Dhamma. They wanted to listen to lectures. They loved listening to lectures. They wanted to understand what morality meant, what Buddhist morality meant, how Baba Saheb could say morality is like, in Buddhism, is like God in Hinduism. They wanted to learn Buddhist puja. They wanted to understand it. They wanted to practice it. They wanted some of them to learn meditation, see how they could work on their minds. And they wanted to study the Dhamma and go on retreat. So we developed many activities especially in Maharashtra, and two of the most important were the Bhaja Retreat Center near the famous Bhaja Caves, not far from Pune, and this Mahavihara in Dapodi, Pune. We started with Dhamma teaching, but very quickly we found that we couldn't teach people to cultivate metta, loving kindness, and karuna, compassion, without opening our eyes and responding to the terrible conditions so many people had to live in. So we started many social projects, especially those relating to children. This gave those who wanted to practice the Dhamma seriously an opportunity to practice right livelihood, part of the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. They felt that, they were able through their work to do something which helped others less fortunate than them. We established over those years in the 80s and early 90s, over 50 education, health and education health community centers in the slums of Pune, Mumbai, Nagpur, other places. And these were concentrated on children and their mothers so that children could get a better start in life. Along with that, we developed cultural activities for children, sewing classes for women to help give them an income, adult literacy classes, medical work, sports activities, study classes, and so on. And when natural calamities happened, as in Latur in 1993 and Gujarat in 2001, we had to respond. We couldn't just sit and meditate. We had to be active. And, our local people just responded enormously well, doing what they could. Then again, there were the Mumbai floods, the tsunami. Scheduled castes and scheduled tribes usually suffer terrible discrimination in times of calamities. And I found this myself when I visited some of these places soon after the calamity. I found, especially in giving out relief, the food supplies and so on, they would suffer terrible discrimination, and children are the ones who suffer most, and their education suffers. So we'd started many hostels in Maharashtra before, so we started hostels especially for children affected by these calamities in Latur, Umarga, in Gujarat, and later on in Tamil Nadu after the tsunami. Overall, we started over 25 hostels, and thousands of children have benefited over 36 years, or it's more than 36 years, yeah. And as I say, most of these have been developed not just as a result of calamities. The girl on the left, you probably know her picture from the horrible Karlenji incident in 2006. Yeah. So not so much under Triratna formal activities, but under Manusky, we developed advocacy work, helping to end human scavenging, bring attention to atrocities, as well as supporting the victims. We developed capacity building, working with other discriminated people. But all this work, all the social work we've done, Dhamma practice is the essence, is the foundation. So all these projects are run by people. Many of them been brought up in the worst conditions, you know, one room, no running water, no proper sewage, you know yourself what this is like. They have changed their lives through Buddhist practice. And with the strength that Dhamma has given them, they have wanted to help others, and they've got meaning in this. Now, at first, Dr. Ambedkar's followers were concentrated in his own community in Maharashtra, as I said. There were pockets in other main cities, Delhi, Chennai, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, Lucknow, Kanpur, and others. But this changed. Actually, even in Maharashtra, it was only really Dr. Ambedkar's community, not other scheduled caste communities who followed him. But all this changed with the centenary of his birth in 1991. All over India, scheduled castes, as well as people from other discriminated communities, were becoming inspired by what he had done and his socio-political thought. And his growing influence is indicated by his statues in every part of India. And every political party has to have his photo on their stage. That wasn't the case 40 years ago. Yeah? But it's really, especially since the centenary. And young people from these communities wanted to know not only about his political work, but why he'd given so much importance to converting to Buddhism. Now, it was impossible to respond effectively to this explosion of interest in the Dhamma all over India. And I mean explosion of interest everywhere. So what we did, we established the Nagarjuna Institute at Nagaloka, on the Nagaloka campus, to run residential courses to inspire young people all over India in Baba Saheb's vision of Prabuddha Bharat, and to train them in Buddhist teachings and social action. And then the idea was that they would then go back to their village and towns and share what they've learned with others. This is the Nagaloka campus as it is today. So this is the end of this first presentation. Next, in 2 days' time, I shall be talking about the activities at Nagaloka under the heading of Reformation of Mind and the World. And so I'll introduce you to that. So thank you.
Lokamitra sir, thank you so much for this background of Nagalok development. There are a few questions coming up. One of it is what kind of difference that you see today compared to when you came 40 years back?
I mean, there's an enormous interest, enormous difference in breadth and in depth. So, as I said before, not only the Buddhist movement, but the Ambedkarite movement was really limited to one particular community in Maharashtra and a few pockets elsewhere. That began changing, I think, in the 70s with Kanchi Ram and so on, but very, very limited. But then also, you didn't have that many young people who were confident. I mean, at that time, people were still much poorer than they are today. Today you've got young people really confident, well educated, and really want to take this movement forward. Then senior officers who were Buddhist would often be shy to declare their allegiance to Baba Saheb, their appreciation of Baba Saheb, the fact that they were Buddhist. They would often hide that. Today is completely different. People are proud, people stand up, people are confident. And you've got, something I wrote about a couple of years ago. You had the Bhima Koregaon incident. I used to go in the bus past the Stumba at Bhima Koregaon in the late 70s and early 80s on my way from Pune to Aurangabad. It was hardly ever, that 1st of January celebration was hardly ever held or celebrated then. A few people would gather. Now you've got lakhs and lakhs and lakhs gathering there every year. And I think this symbolizes the newfound confidence in the community. So I would say there's been a sea change in the Ambedkarite community in the last 40 years.
Lokamitra sir, here is a personal question. You are married to the Indian Buddhist, and you have lived all your adult life, most of it, like 40 years in India. What struck you so much that you made this community your family? When I was in England, Sangrachta, my teacher, gave a series of lectures on the transformation of self and world in Buddhism. He showed that you can't transform the world unless you transform yourself. You can't transform yourself unless you're working on the world. And this inspired me very, very deeply. And this was in 1976. Then I came to India in 1977. I was a sort of temporary monk visiting the holy places. And I came to Nagpur unknowing, I didn't realize it was the 21st anniversary of the conversion that day. And I saw here the real possibility of Buddhism impacting society. And I just wanted to be part of it. I thought, I can't really say any more. I just felt this was the future of Buddhism. This was where you could see it having a mark more than anywhere else in the world. And if I could help, I wanted to do so. So it's always inspired me. And then when I decided to stay here longer, I decided to get married. And so I'm married. And that's it. Here are two more questions coming up for you from the audiences. One of the questions is, what role digital media played or can play in propagating Dhamma? Can you please give some ideas as to how we can use the digital media to spread the Dhamma in India?
I'm 72. I'm not going to learn digital media at this my age. It's younger people. But all I know is it can play an enormous role. And I also know that it's going to be much, much, much more significant after this terrible epidemic, pandemic. Yeah, and it's it has the power to link us up with every corner in India, and we must use it. So, but I'm not the person to say how, I'm afraid.
So, Lokamitra, there is this question for you. What could have you done differently from the beginning? Any mistake that you regret or want to redo?
Well, I've made millions of mistakes. You know, I, with hindsight, possibly I would have done things differently. But no one knows how the future is going to turn out. You know, I sort of sometimes kick myself for not seeing how things would develop. It's very difficult looking into the future. You know, who could have in the late 70s seen I mean, I suppose some people could have seen the internet, but not for ordinary people like me. Who could have seen mobiles, this sort of technology? Who could have seen what was going to happen to the Ambedkarite movement? I saw this incredible vision of Baba Seb's, but I had no idea that it would mushroom like it's done these days. So I think if I'd known, I would have done things differently, but I have no basic regrets about how I've lived my life. Sorry, that doesn't help very much.
Maybe in the course of 2 lectures that you can talk about it.
I'll say more on that, yeah.
Yeah. Another question for you, Lokamitra. How do you see future of Buddhism in India, especially in northern India?
You know, I was in Mumbai at Chaityabhumi was it 1993 on 6th of December. And that was the day the Ayodhya thing closed down India. Yeah? I got the last train from Mumbai to Pune. And when I was going to Dada station from Chaityabhumi, I saw hundreds of people from Ambedkarites from UP marching from Dada station to Chaityabhumi. And I was incredibly impressed by their confidence, their strength, their determination. And I don't really know enough about North India today, but I believe that as Ambedkarites, as Buddhists become stronger and stronger, as they are all the time in UP, it will have a very, very strong impact on the rest of India. But I have to say, I fear for things. You've got, Baba Seb talked about the revolution, the counter-revolution. And what you've got now, you've got a very, very strong, confident Ambedkarite and Buddhist movement. And they're not going to give up on their gains at all. Yeah? They're not going to let the caravan slide back at all in the slightest. And yet you've still got a very strong core of the old values which followers of Baba Seb have suffered from for hundreds of years. We have to always remember his teaching on the Buddha as the Prince of Peace. Now, I don't believe that means compromising our dignity, compromising ourselves in any way, but I don't know what's going to happen.
Lokamitra sir, there is a question like in this situation where people are locked down and there is a atmosphere of uncertainty, pandemic, and in these uncertain times, what is the role of Buddhists in these uncertain times? That's a question from the audience. What should the Buddhists do in this type of situation?
Well, I'm going to talk about this in my third talk a bit more, but obviously reflect on Buddhist teachings, practice Buddhist teachings, cultivate skillful mental states, positive mental states, be as fully human as you can. But that's only half of the Dhamma, as I'll explain on the 7th. You know, for Baba said Buddhism was a path of action. It couldn't just be sitting at home meditating. It couldn't just be sort of studying the Dhamma. It had to be expressed in action. That's why we have the walking Buddha at Naga as the center of the Nagaloka campus. And this, from what I understand, was what Baba's, the image of the Buddha Baba said most liked to see. So we have to find some way to help not only ourselves, but help others. And obviously everyone's situation is different. Many people are working at home like you, but incredibly active. I can't sort of give a general recommendation because everyone's situation is different. But first of all, try and practice the Dhamma, understand the Dhamma, cultivate skillful mental states. But then what can you do for others? That's the question. There's a lovely quote of from the Buddha and the Future's Religion. I can't remember it now properly, but you know, basically Baba Seb says, implies that religion is useless unless it has compassion.
Good. So, Lokamitra, we are going to hear more about Nagaloka and its history, its philosophy, its future, and the vision of Nagaloka and relating to the Prabuddha Bharat in the course of 2 remaining talks. And we would like to thank you so much for joining us today on the Ambedkar Caravan. And dear audiences, we are going to meet Lokamitra again day after tomorrow and a day to day after tomorrow. That's like on 5th and 7th, we are going to meet him. And please raise any questions that you have on your minds about Lokamitra's presentation, or anything that is on your mind, so that we can try to ask these questions to Lokamitra directly and get the answers from him. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Lokamitra, once again, and we will meet you very soon. Thank you so much.